Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Whoop. Start tracking your strain, recovery, and sleep scores today. To get your hands on a free strap and an extra month's membership, make sure to click the link in our description. On today's episode, we're asking the question of whether CrossFit needs a competitor in the space. To help me discuss the topic, we have two people who have been in the space for quite some time. We have Matt O'Keefe, the Chief Executive Officer of HWPO, and Jared Graybeal. He's the GM of Underdog Athletics and the founder of the Zalos Games. O'Keefe, I want to start with you. You have been so deeply involved in several aspects of CrossFit as a sport, but also CrossFit as a business, between working with athletes, formerly working with Loud and Live, hosting many major competitions, both off-season and in-season. But do you think that it is possible that CrossFit will ever have a competitor within this same ecosystem?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I mean, if you look historically at sports, I mean, it's worked both ways, right? Like, I think there's a positive sometimes to that. I don't necessarily know that it is in our space. I mean, there are times at which it was probably teed up for that. And if anyone was probably more primed to be involved in that, it would have been me because of where I sat in the ecosystem. And I didn't believe in it. I believe in CrossFit Games as a platform. I believe, in now leadership that's in charge, and I believe that the right thing is to continue to point in the same direction there. Will there ever be someone? Sure, I'm sure somebody might take their shot. Won't be me. So I think it's but I think that CrossFit Games, CrossFit as a sport, has proved to really be able to endure a lot of heat. Look at what's gone on the last whatever 3 or 4 years. Leadership changes, ownership changes, some chaos, COVID, and what continues to emerge and grow is CrossFit as a sport. So, and I think some of it has to do with all of us being willing to continue to support it, knowing we're in a major growth phase still. So, who knows? Honestly, to your question direct, I don't know if anybody has any sort of designs on that. I think a lot of people will point towards what's going on in golf as like maybe a positive. I mean, you can look at both sides of that. Like, I think, I don't think anybody's really watching live golf, to be honest with you. I'm the biggest golf fan probably in the CrossFit space and more involved with it on the business side than anybody as well. It's definitely created a opportunity for golfers to make more money. And some people think held the tour accountable. I don't know. There's a lot that I know too that the tour was moving in the direction it's now shown its cards on before live emerged too. So who knows? I mean, I don't think that conflict or competition is always positive is my point. I think that, there's a lot that to be said for, stakeholders and movers and shakers to get in a room and try to continue to, build something that's started as well before you kind of look at these pivotal moments where your frustration leads you to, well, I'm just going to do it the way I see it in a different place. But it's a good question. I don't know how Jared feels, but that's just how I feel.
Jared, what are your initial thoughts, especially when we're looking at off-season competitions, specifically those majors like the Rogues, Dubai, Wadapalooza? Do you think that you could see this happening with one of those? Do you think that it's a possibility?
For sure. I think there's a place like in the ecosystem across the like in the season for CrossFit competitors for competitions like Rogue, Wadapalooza, to stimulate growth within the economy of the CrossFit Games. So like my question, I have a question for you. When you were talking about like does CrossFit need a competitor, are we specifically talking about like the CrossFit Games segment of like CrossFit as a whole?
Yeah. So, like, when I look at some of these off-season competitions, and if I'm an athlete, sometimes they have to choose whether, like, they're going to take this full calendar year to get better for the CrossFit Games. But do we think that maybe a competitor comes into the play where athletes aren't necessarily training for the CrossFit Games anymore? They're training specifically for like a Rogue or Dubai, just to give an example.
Yeah, no, I would sort of, for the most part, I agree with O'Keefe. I personally believe in the CrossFit Games. I believe in the Open and quarterfinals and semifinals. Can it be done differently and better? Sure, but that's the evolution of any sport, of any business life cycle. We're still very young. I mean, I made a comment recently on, I think, on the Morning Chalk Up Instagram. Somebody was saying how much NFL pays out and things like that. And we're in like year maybe 16 of the CrossFit Games, and in year 16 of the NFL, people were making like $14,000 a year. Granted, that was, 70 years ago, but if you look at that wage relative to now, it was like 70 grand or something like that. And so we've got CrossFit Games athletes making well over 70 grand a year. So I would say like the progress that the CrossFit Games have made in sport and in providing income for athletes is much quicker than that of the NFL, for example. Again, we're talking about years ago, so it's hard to compare apples to oranges here. But to answer the question, does CrossFit need a competitor? No. But can they use one to stimulate progress? For sure. And I wouldn't necessarily, like, for example, the Zalos Games is not a competitor. I started it to play a part in the off-season opportunities for CrossFit athletes, whether they're CrossFit Games or semifinals or whatnot. But it was never intended to be like a new replacement, but it was intended to stimulate progress. So do the CrossFit Games need competitions like Rogue and Wadapalooza and Dubai to continue to stimulate progress? I think yes. Not to say that the CrossFit Games don't have the best intentions in mind, or Noble and the supporters of the CrossFit Games don't have the best intentions in mind. But hypothetically, if there was no other competition throughout the season, CrossFit Games would have to raise the standard each year. But since there are competitions, especially like Rogue, paying out, $250,000, I think, to the first place competitor, like, those are competitions that make the CrossFit Games have conversations to say, shoot, Rogue is upping the ante every year. We should do the same. Granted, I'm speculating. I haven't been in those conversations, but I'm just imagining, from coming from business myself, it's like, hey, there are other players in this game that are stepping it up. Whether or not they can afford to do that over the long term is irrelevant, because if they negatively affect us in the short term, we have to think, how can we step it up too? And I think that's why monopolies are bad, is my main point. Do we need a competitor? Maybe not, but are monopolies good? No. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, on.
Oop, O'Keefe, I think we lost you for a minute.
Oh man, I hope I didn't offend him.
No.
He's back.
I'm back. Honestly, the games, I don't look at like Rogue, Wadapalooza, which I was involved in, as more than, more stability for the ecosystem, and and providing for athletes. Like, I've always been athlete first. Really try to provide earning opportunities, but not like, those things aren't meant to be competitive with the game season, which is a true world championship process that we have in place, that honestly I'll protect, and lay down in traffic to protect, because it has great legacy. So I think there's a, an ecosystem being built around, competitions that I think, can then meld together, in maybe some sort of greater system, which I wouldn't be surprised to see at some point, right? Like, that's when, you sort of implement that golf touring process into what we do, which I think makes a lot of sense. Now, the volume is not sustainable at a golf level, like weekly, but you can sort of find the right mix. But yeah, I mean, if you now like boil down, at least from my perspective, what is CrossFit, games comparatively, like, and needing a competitor, like, I mean, I don't want, nor I would hope anybody want, somebody to sort of like come in and compete from a world championship perspective. But I mean, again, you're seeing it from the live golf perspective is you can throw as much money as you want at something. It doesn't feel the same. Like it doesn't replace the legacy of the British Open or the Masters. And all those kids have chosen money over the legacy side,
Mhm.
which again, I don't know how you could ever, look at any of them and say you're making the wrong choice. They're making the right choice for them, and money's more important than legacy. Um, but fortunately, right now, I think the money is all pointed towards for an athlete the CrossFit Games, whether it's the prize money's the most significant top to bottom from an event perspective. It's the biggest prize purse in the world, and then secondarily, all the brands point towards it from a success metric for how an athlete is sponsored. So um, again, yeah, I mean, I don't think that, it's necessarily, I don't know if you're asking it that way, either competition or like more variety. There's two ways to sort of skin that.
Well, and as you keep talking about, and I don't know how big our audience is when it comes to golf. O'Keefe, I'm a golfer as well, so I've been
Yeah,
following the PGA and the creation of Live, but it seems from the outside looking in without being in those conversations that Live has a little bit strong armed the PGA to give athletes an off season and time off to maybe up the ante when it comes to payouts, things like that. So I'm just thinking, like, could there be a opportunity for a competitor to challenge CrossFit to almost like expedite the professionalism of the sport when it comes to giving them off-season payouts, travel compensations, things like that, which some competitions
right.
are doing.
It's interesting because I think you have to then answer the question, which, I might be most connected to is like, what would it take the athletes to go do something else, right? Like, and it'd be hard because what I think is missing in that whole equation is where does everything point? Everything points towards the CrossFit Games. So there's a like this seismic shift that would have to go on where it's like, the brands, your head to toe shoe and clothing sponsors and all your other sponsors that are saying if you win this, we'll significantly enhance how our relationship and how we compensate you. There's a lot more to it than just like travel, like, well, because all that is there, right, for the top athletes in the world. I think a lot of the noise comes out of it. I totally understand it. This middle group that's like, I'm not getting travel support and like I have to, cost me all this money. Well, that's the same in every sport. Like ask a
Mhm.
bobsledder what that's like. Ask, a kid chasing an Olympic dream what that's like. And people who then earn through their performances, these bigger relationships from a sponsorship perspective, they have all that. Like they have travel support, they have, and it's like, some people look at it as a rich get richer scenario, but it's no, it's like, go grind and just like any other sport. I think our sport sometimes likes to think that we're this, unique invention of like, how sport operates because it's just such a passionate environment. But there are a lot of cool things that, we can derive energy from and experience from that we don't have to redo and reinvent, which we try to sometimes, right? So it's like, um, I don't know. I mean, I think that, when you look at the live golf situation, like I have my personal like emotional feelings, but I have
Mhm.
really good friends that play on tour that have been posed with the same questions. And I would understand either side of that. Like, I don't fault any of those kids for going to play for $100 million. Like, if somebody put 100 million in front of me to go play a sport somewhere, I'd be like, shit, I have to think about this because you have a family and parents and like all this life changing opportunity. And like, there's a lot of noise in the market of like, oh, these guys are assholes, like choosing money. Yes, that's their job, like to produce
Mhm.
money for their families. But on our end, like, I think a lot of things that people would look at from a competitive perspective, like the necessity around like a competitor are already in place. They're just there's a big group of people that I think are in a place where they need to go to work and earn that right to get there that are noisy around it. And it's not disrespect from them. It's just I think their lack of experience on like what sport means. It's an individual sport that you fund yourself, like so many out there, like golf. Like ask a player that's on the Corn Ferry Tour what it's like. You lose your ass. You're driving around the country in like a shitty car. You can't pay your caddy. You're eating like microwave meals. Those are kids that look on the outside like they've made it, right? That's the way it is. Go to work, grind. Like we don't need necessarily a competitor for some of what I think is a lot of the noise. But again, that's like, once we move down line and like there's a lot of these like micro components where there's billions flowing through the market and like the money's not getting to the right place, who knows? But I think, I would love to be a steward that helps it not have to get to that point as
Mm.
some of others that are, I really love who's involved at a high level on so many angles. I'm incredibly excited about Don Fall. I've worked closely with JB, on a lot of things, and I think he gets it. Rogue and Bill and Katie and Marcus and Michael and Todd from Noble. These guys are all people that, myself with what I do are trying to steward the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And man, they're pointed in a very, very good, awesome, beneficial for everybody in the ecosystem north. So I didn't come on here to like defend the honor of like not having a competitor in case somebody was thinking about it. But like when you think about those guys, in there would be what you would think is your solution to maybe some sort of alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anybody thinks like that.
Sure. And obviously the three of us, I mean, we all do CrossFit. We all work in a CrossFit element. All three of us very different, but we're still here. I'm curious though, and Jared, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but could there be a benefit if there was a competitor for CrossFit as a whole?
I think so. With the question being, does it need a competitor? Like O'Keefe is saying, I think for the most part, everyone's pointed in the right direction. But could they use a competitor? Sure. I don't necessarily, because O'Keefe also said that he knows behind the scenes some positive things that were happening in golf. So did golf need LIV? Maybe not. Maybe they were going in the right direction, but did LIV help stimulate those changes quicker? Maybe, probably. And so I think the same thing applies to the CrossFit Games. If hypothetically, and this would be very difficult because this is a passion first driven sport. It's not, people don't start CrossFit in their teens these days because it's like they're going to be a billionaire. It's not the same as the NFL or the MLB or the NBA currently. So people are driven by passion when they start this sport. So there's not this expectation right away that everyone's going to make a ton of money. However, if a company were to come in, and they would have to spend a lot of money upfront, very much like LIV, and say they'd have to trademark like fittest in the universe or something better, right? Like something technically better. It would have to be driven by ego and finance, right? Because people do the CrossFit Games because it makes them some money, sure, and more over time, but because they want to be the fittest on earth, or at least the 17th fittest on earth. There's something to be proud of, right? Because that's such an extraordinary accomplishment that when you do Rogue or when you do Wodapalooza, or even when you do like, we'll say a competitor, maybe like Grid League or something like that, no matter if you win, you're still not the quote unquote fittest on earth. And that's what the CrossFit Games has been able to leverage since the beginning of it all. And that's how it's been able to evolve, driven by passion and not by money. And so long story short, could it use a competitor? If another organization came in and said, hey, we're going to host a competition mid-August, we're going to pay out $1 million, or well, we'll say 2 million, right? Because they have to pay out more to be competitive. And we're going to bring in Nike instead of Noble, and we're going to bring in blah, blah, blah. If they were to replicate it, but just up the ante and have like a similar title attached to it, then would that help CrossFit? It would probably complicate some of their directives because now they're under a ton of pressure. But could it potentially help like catalyze positive change in a shorter period of time and increase accountability? Sure. Could it hurt it? Possibly too, because then it just, maybe CrossFit Games has plans over the next 3 years that they feel like they now need to accomplish in 1 year, and then they get crunched for time. It increases stress. People are quitting. So could it hurt it at the same time? True. Like, yes. So it's a risk, but do they need a competitor? I don't think so. Could they use one? Maybe.
What is the, like, what is the catalyst there though, would be my question. Like, do you think that, again, like we can always move faster and fight for better. Like I couldn't agree more on that. Like we want more and want it faster for athletes, for the space. I think that if you really know a lot of the economics of the space and particularly the games, they've just consistently forward invested in that. Like, there's not like huge TV deals yet. There's not all this like money that people seem to wrap themselves around there being. I mean, I just know the business side of it. So it's like, you know, I get the theory of a competitor maybe being good to like catalyze certain things, but at this point, have at it. Like, you're not going to see anything that, these guys are way ahead of the curve at this point. I will tell you, because I know the economics, and economics play a vital role. So just like live, like, you can throw hundreds of millions at anything you want. Doesn't mean it's going to work. And is it good for the athletes? I don't know. How good is it for an athlete that played the live tour that got guaranteed 3 million, but will never tee another golf ball on the PGA Tour the rest of his life, and he's 25 years old? I'd say that's a pretty shitty situation to be in, if you're asking me. So, I think that's there's a lot of, often noise around like, all this stuff that needs to get done faster or change. And again, I'm not an apologist for anybody, on the CrossFit side, but like, I also know the plight. Like, there's a lot of dollars going out that aren't being matched coming in, that we need to continue to work on, so that, it makes more sense. And then that in there helps the money go back to the athletes. There's a huge forward investment going on. If people think that's BS, well, cool. I'm just, I don't work for them. So I just know that side of it is like what needs our most tender love and care, because we're pretty fortunate that we're part of a system that's been so bullish on what they do and what everybody does around it, that they've been willing to consistently forward invest on it. And I think it's a lost piece of the conversation often in this. Again, like, they've effed things up, so have we. Like, but that's the way you get better. One thing they haven't effed up is they've consistently overinvested in themselves, the sport, and us, to help grow this thing. And so I think that all that could come of a competitor right now is you could create division, and it would really hurt.
Jared,
there would probably be. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. Finish your
I was
thought.
going to say, I agree. I think there would probably be a lot of collateral damage and potentially more cons than pros if that hypothetical situation like live were to happen in today's CrossFit economy.
Right. And I think we could all agree like that, maybe there are positions that, a sport is in where it needs that, right? Like, that's absolutely, like, there's a lot of players on the golf tour, it's, like Phil Mickelson's sort of pounding his chest and he's like, look what I did. And it's like, well, I mean, there were other ways he could have gone about that if you know some of the things behind the curtain. But again, yeah, like, cool, dude. Like, I think, visibly what looks like held some people accountable, feet to the fire. But again, the TV contract for the PGA Tour was done at like bulk, like telephone numbers prior to there even being this mention of people leaving for live. The money was trickling there very quickly soon anyway. So like, it's like, who knows? I mean, some people celebrate him on that. Some people don't and think it was coming anyway, but like, that's like, again, this sport that has multiple hundreds of billions of dollars flowing through it. We got a long way to go. It's like, we're still in the investment phase. They're just trying to figure out how much money gets to the right hands in a sport like that. When you're starting to talk about that, totally get it, because it's like the players have a really good gripe on are enough, we own the tour, enough dollars getting back to us. That was what all that's about, right? Like, if you really take it down to this like foundational topic, it's like, more dollars need to be getting to us. We're the face of this. We don't, where's the money going to? It needs to be coming this way. And yeah, that's happened now. And I think that, the tour players, I mean, good Lord, look at what the purses will look like in 2 years from now, and people will fall over. They, Jordan Spieth had the most successful season in the history of golf and got paid like 10 million bucks. And Ben Roethlisberger was like, had this shitty season and got 45 million. And he was like the 10th rated quarterback in the league. And the players were like, this is BS, right? And that's sort of like how this shift has gone. But again, that's like, we're 40 years away. We're 40 years away from that type of situation. anybody that would take a shot at this point, it's all ego from my perspective, because it's like, if you really know what's going on in this whole thing, and you know how tender it still is and how fortunate we are that, a lot of people are spending dollars that aren't coming back. And you took a shot and be like, this is about you. Like, you just want to create turmoil or, get some, positive personal sort of, success or reinforcement around something that you're doing here. Like, again, I don't, I look back at the last 3 years, like, when all the shit was hitting the fan, like, I was there to say, like, hey, athletes, I'll help you if like you want to not be a part of that because you don't line up values wise. I didn't want to run my own event. Like, do you think I wanted to just flush $3 million down the toilet? My partners were willing to support it at the time. But that was a support measure. That wasn't a, like, if anybody or anything was like gonna go and take their whack, that was the time, right? And I was like, fuck, I do not want this to happen right now, but anyway, that's a long-winded, there's complexity is the point.
Sure.
Like, and I totally understand the question, but it's like, we're so many years away from like that type of accountability being necessary.
We'll have this conversation again in 20 years.
Let's do it.
Yes.
And we'll see where we are.
Sorry, you asked one question. It was like the two of us were off to the races. It was like, okay.
But it's great conversation to have, and we haven't had it before. So I love picking both of your brains. Jared, what would you say your bottom line is?
My bottom line is, I believe that the CrossFit Games have the right mindset and accountability currently, and with the trajectory that they've been growing each year in terms of awarding the athletes and creating more opportunities. They don't necessarily need a quote unquote competitor, but they do need the off-season competitions to continue to up the ante, to hold themselves accountable to being the best competition to compete at during the year. That's my bottom line.
O'Keefe, what's your bottom line?
I have so many things I could say for this. I honestly, I think it's just, finding ways for people to continue to, raise the tide together and, keep this ship steered in the same direction, and, cultivating, more opportunities for the athletes and at the same time. That it doesn't mean that it has to be that, the big premium platform has to be competitive with something else. It's, Madrid's a perfect example. I was just at that event. That was badass. And there was great prize money. And it was a profitable proposition for everybody involved. The athlete experience was awesome. Largest event probably from an athlete perspective in the history of our space. We need more of that. Like, more opportunities for people that competed at that event that are rising stars to then go earn and show off their talent and learn through their mistakes to get better and then get to that top tier, right? So it's just, we all need to just keep grinding together is my bottom line. Keep grinding. This thing is going great and in the right direction. We just have a lot of work to do. So let's try to all get on the same page or stay on it.
Matt, Jared, thank you guys so much for having this conversation, and we'll see you guys next time.
Awesome.
Thank you.